Photographs lie all the time. They crop, they flatter, they steal a second and pretend it's the whole story. But sometimes a photograph tells too much truth. In 1972, a man in Vermont bought a secondhand Argus C3 camera from a dusty thrift shop, $3, including the case. Inside, he found an undeveloped roll of Kodak chrome film. Gosh, that brings back memories. 8 exposures. When the clerk at the pharmacy ran them through the machine, the first few frames were ordinary: snow, trees, an old car that had seen better days. Then came the 8th. A woman standing in front of a building that hadn't been built yet. You can see the date on the construction sign, 1974. But the negative? It had been chemically dated to 1968. That's the kind of mass that makes physicists sigh and priests start polishing the silver. Experts at Polaroid's Cambridge lab confirmed the emulsion batch. Experts at MIT confirmed the timestamp. And yet, every line, shadow, and reflection matched the building that, at the time, existed only on blueprints. The man who found it didn't try to sell it. He mailed it back to Kodak with a note that read, "If this is a trick, I'd like to know how I did it." He never got a reply. Tonight we look into the photograph that shouldn't exist, where science met superstition, and neither blinked first. This is truthish, mostly true, always strange. His name was Walter Keane, not that Walter Keane, the one who painted big-eyed children. This Walter was a retired high school science teacher from Rutland, Vermont, who liked 3 things: coffee black, snow quiet, and cameras mechanical. He bought the Argus on a Thursday because it looked lonely. He said that to the cashier. "Looks lonely." She gave him 50 cents off. The film inside was brittle with age, curling like it was hiding something. Walter, being Walter, didn't toss it. He sent it to the local pharmacy, tucked in a manila envelope that said, "Develop if possible." The clerk rolled her eyes. Everyone thinks their grandma's camera's haunted. But then the photos came back. She stopped rolling her eyes. Frame 8 was wrong. Beautifully, perfectly wrong. The woman stood on a sidewalk. No one remembered paving. In front of a building no one has seen yet. Sunlight hit the windows at the same angle it would 2 years later, when the new post office finally opened. Walter thought it was a double exposure at first, until he noticed her reflection in the glass, where there was no glass to reflect. He did what any good science teacher would do. He tried to disprove it. He measured, compared, even used an overhead projector from the school to line up with the skyline. Everything matched, too well. The more he proved it wasn't possible, the more possible it became. When word got around, the photo started making its rounds through coffee shops and basements, photocopied into fuzzy oblivion. By the time the local paper called it the future ghost photo, the real print had already disappeared. Walter said he mailed it back to Kodak, but there was no record they ever received it, which is strange because he kept the receipt. And that is where things get interesting. Photographic anomalies aren't rare. Most of the time, they're dust, reflections, or bad chemistry, tiny accidents mistaken for miracles. So when Walter's future photo reached the lab, that's exactly what everyone expected to find. Kodak's technicians logged it under Unusual Development Batch 42-7B. The negative tested genuine. The date stamp on the film age read K14, 1968. No tampering, no splicing, no chemical inconsistencies. Then came the problem. The glass reflections visible in the image contained objects that didn't exist yet. A payphone, a bicycle rack, a tree still a sapling in 1972. You can't fake what hasn't happened yet, not without a time machine or a miracle. Photo engineers suggested a phenomenon known as image persistence, when faint electromagnetic fields from previous exposures bleed forward through the film layers, creating kind of an accidental double vision. Except there was no previous exposure. The rest of the roll was clean. Polaroid scientists at Cambridge called it latent memory, which is just a fancy way of saying we don't know either. And MIT's image analysis group ran spectral comparisons. The shadow aligned with the sun's angle dated exactly March 8th, 1974, 2 years in the future. They checked the math 3 times, then 4. Then one engineer wrote on the file, "If accurate, this photo shouldn't exist." That's how it got its name. After the test, the image went missing again, this time from a locked drawer at the lab. All that remains are photocopies and a very nervous intern's testimony. "I thought I saw the woman move." For the record, the lab officially blamed humidity. Every small town has a few stories that won't sit quietly. In Rutland, Vermont, the woman in the photograph became one of them. At first, locals said she looked like Helen Morrissey, who vanished from town in 1967. She worked at the old post office, the same one replaced by the building in the photo. Blonde hair, dark coat, always carried a small satchel like it was armor. The problem was, Helen never came home from her shift, and no one ever found her. When the photos started circulating, people whispered that she'd come back, not as a ghost, but as a preview. Historical records show that Helen's last day at work was March 8, 1967, exactly 7 years before the light and shadow angles in the photograph were calculated. Coincidence? Sure. Or as Walter said, if you believe in those. Researchers from the University of Vermont interviewed old co-workers. One remembered Helen saying she wanted to see what came next. That phrase, they said, stuck with her, like she meant it, literally. Others claimed she'd been fascinated with cameras, that she used to borrow an old Argus from her brother, the same model that Walter found. It's never been proven, but when the original photo was enhanced decades later, you could just make out the faint outline of a second figure behind the reflection in the glass. A man, partially turned, holding a camera. Walter, for the record, died in 1983, but his daughter says he never owned that jacket. In the negatives, the impossible woman was never alone. Photographs age like people do, slowly, unevenly, and with a little yellow around the edges. But this one didn't. Walter's daughter Anne kept one of the remaining prints in a cedar box after he died. For nearly a decade, it stayed crisp, colors bright, paper stiff, while every other photo in the box went brittle and pale. By 1992, the lab's photocopies had faded to fog, but the print from Walter's attic looked like it had been developed that morning. Conservation experts examined the paper fibers, expecting a varnish or synthetic coating. They found none. Chemical composition? Standard Kodachrome. Preservation status? Impossible. When they checked the color spectrum, something else appeared. A faint pattern of static in the shadows, like the noise you see when an old TV is just barely tuned. They called it temporal interference because ghost pixels sounded bad on grant applications. Anne said that in the months before she donated it, she started seeing changes, not big ones, just detail shifting. A curtain half drawn that hadn't been, a lamppost leaning slightly more with each glance. And once, when she looked at the woman's reflection, the glass no longer showed a street, but a field under snow. You could explain it as aging dye or just a mind, finding shapes in static. Or you could admit, what Anne wouldn't say out loud, that the photo wasn't decaying, it was developing. In photography, a latent image is what exists on film before it's developed. A chemical ghost waiting to be revealed by light. The molecules remember what the lens saw, even if the human brain forgot. Dr. Harriet Lowen, a cognitive physicist at UVM, once described it this way. Every photograph is a frozen perception. The universe remembers that second, even when we don't. She wasn't talking about ghosts. She was talking about electrons, about how information can linger in matter, how patterns of energy can echo across time the same way light echoes across space. Of course, once you start using words like echo and memory in a grant proposal, you stop being a physicist and start being a poet with a lab coat. Lowen's team recreated latent image persistence under controlled conditions. Old film stock sometimes carried faint electromagnetic residue from the camera that held it, tiny magnetic fingerprints that recorded more than just light. That explains some anomalies, but not this one. In Walter's photograph, the interference pattern wasn't random static. It repeated every 7.3 seconds when scanned. A perfect cycle, like a heartbeat. It was as if the film was remembering something that kept happening long after the shutter closed. The team called it temporal resonance. The press called it time bleeding through the negatives. Both sounded ridiculous until the experiment equipment started picking up the same pattern from an empty piece of film. And that's when they stopped calling it an artifact. They started calling it a signal. In 2003, a freelance photographer named Dale Harker was cataloging abandoned buildings across New England. He wasn't much a believer in ghosts, glitches, fate. He liked angles, light, and getting paid. One afternoon near Rutland, he stopped to get a photograph of a vacant municipal building slated for demolition. A 1970s-era post office with a sun-faded mural and cracked blue tile. He took 3 shots, standard composition, building, parking lot, sky. When he developed the film, the third frame didn't match. The building looked new. The mural was clean. The windows gleamed. And a woman, faint, color-drained, and almost smiling, stood in the doorway. Behind her, you can just make out the reflection in the glass, a man, holding an old Argus C3 camera. Dale, for the record, had never heard of Walter Keane or his photograph, but he posted on his local history forum. Within hours, someone uploaded a side-by-side comparison. Every detail lined up. Same angle, same lighting, same figure, even though the photos were taken 31 years apart. A photometric overlay confirmed a perfect spatial match down to sub-millimeter alignment. Impossible by hand, unlikely by luck. When a paranormal blog called it proof of parallel memory, Dale replied, "I don't do metaphysics. I do shutter speeds." But 3 weeks later, he deleted his post and stopped returning emails. He told a colleague that the negatives had gone blank overnight. Then he mailed one copy to the same lab Walter once used in Cambridge. The file number assigned to it? 42-7C, one line below Walter's. By 2004, the case had a paper trail thick enough to qualify as a novella. 2 photographers, 30 years apart, same frame, same ghost. MIT's imaging lab, still embarrassed by the first fiasco, agreed to store the materials in a secure archive. That lasted 6 weeks. When the technicians returned from a weekend shutdown, the cabinet marked Anomalous Imaging 42 series was empty. Not stolen, checked out. Every log entry scrubbed, access code reset, and the security camera for that aisle conveniently undergoing an upgrade. You know it's serious when even the janitor stops making eye contact. Internal memos later surfaced, one from a Defense Department liaison requesting temporary custody for spectral analysis, another recommending containment and non-disclosure to prevent public confusion. The working theory, if you can call it that, was that the photographs might contain measurable temporal data, that the emulsion had somehow recorded time itself. Maybe. No one ever saw the originals again, but one proof sheet escaped the purge. A lab intern, the same nervous one from the 1970s incident, had kept a contact print tucked in a copy of Modern Photography Monthly. He mailed it, years later, to a collector in Burlington with a note. They hum under the fluorescent light. But of course they do. When analyzed, that surviving sheet emitted a faint electromagnetic pulse, a repeating rhythm, identical to the temporal resonance from Dr. Lowen's experiments, every 7.3 seconds, like a heartbeat. That's when the government stopped denying that the photographs existed. They just stopped mentioning them at all. In the end, maybe it wasn't the camera that was haunted. Maybe it was the moment. Every photograph is a conversation between light and time. And sometimes, maybe time talks back. Walter Keane just wanted to test a roll of film. Instead, he caught something that shouldn't have been there. A glimpse of what the world was about to remember. Physics says energy can't be destroyed, only changed, echoed, and reframed. So maybe every photograph is still echoing, 1,000 little mirrors whispering, "I remember you." Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe that woman just wanted someone to see her again. Either way, the photograph existed, and according to the data, it still does. Thanks for watching, and if you want more stories where the impossible looks a lot like the truth, you know where to find us. Truthish, where things are mostly true and always strange.